let's set something straight before going into this. The term smrt fašizmu, svoboda narodu is a term that was used during the Nazi occupation of Yugoslavia by Tito's communist partisans as a way to greet each other. Given the context of its creation, I'd say it's completely fair to assume that it was hailing the death of an opposing ideology, fascism. What does this have to do with anything? In the opening clip, I showed you a variant of this salute that has sprouted in the ongoing anti-government protests in Slovenia. Smrt janšizmu, svoboda vsem. Now, our benevolent and wise Prime Minister took this as a personal threat. The protesters are actually calling for his own death, he says. I can't believe anyone has to say this, but that's just false. The term Janšizm is a made-up term that describes the populist authoritarian right-wing rhetoric that our Prime Minister is distinctly known for here. The protesters are calling for the metaphorical death of Janez Janša's rhetoric, not his life. Dobro? Jasno? Okay, važi. So, to understand how we got here, we must first look at what happened a long time ago in the distant year of 2019. God, what I wouldn't do for a return to that skewed normality. But yes, in the year 2019 we had a newly elected Prime Minister. This guy, Marian Šarec. What were his qualifications to be Prime Minister? Well, he had a rich career in comedy. Wait, that's it? Wait, how the fuck did we expect this guy to lead a full mandate? It's worth noting that Šarec did not manage to win enough seats to secure a comfortable majority coalition. Whilst the other social liberal parties in parliament at the time willingly cooperated with him to block out Janša's rise to power, there was only one party whose confidence in supply stopped the Šarec government from collapsing right away. That party is the left. Without going too much into the various problems this caused for the social liberal coalition, the left had all of its proposed policies in the parliament completely ignored and rejected by the other coalition members. One such proposal was the cancellation of supplementary health insurance in the country. When the coalition parties rejected this proposal, it was pretty much over as far as the left's support of the government went. Once the left withdrew their support, the government controlled 45 of the 90 seats in parliament. If you do the math, you'll see that this isn't exactly a comfortable majority. It's not a majority at all, in fact. At this point, their saving grace was that the opposition comprised of two nationalistic right-wing pundit parties, a puppet Christian Democrat party, and a left-wing pundit party that didn't get along with the others enough to have a functioning opposition. However, later coalition infighting still ultimately led to Mr. Šarec stepping down as Prime Minister, causing a bit of a political crisis because it was unclear how a new coalition could even be formed under the current seat distribution in the parliament. Similarly to Sweden, there was an online game of sorts in which you could try to form a stable Slovenian coalition government. However, this was when the unthinkable happened.
In the past 2 weeks, the number of cases of COVID-19 outside China has increased 13-fold, and the number of affected countries has tripled.
The COVID-19 pandemic took the world by shock. It was unprecedented that such a pandemic could even occur in the modern world of advanced medicine. COVID-19 made its landing in Slovenia on the 4th of March, coincidentally one day after a new prime minister had been chosen for the country, Janez Janša. Let's talk about this guy a bit, because I think it's necessary to understand his past to fully comprehend why he's such a controversial topic for Slovenians. Janša was born in 1958 during the time of Josip Broz Tito's socialist Yugoslavia. As a young man, he was a very ardent socialist and a supporter of Tito in the international workers' cause. In fact, let's watch a video from that time that he probably doesn't want people to remember.
Socialistične mladine Slovenije smo zapisali, da se zavzemamo za hitrejše korake pri podružbanju splošne ljudske obrambe in družbene samozaščite. Podružbanje pojmujemo kot del procesa odmiranja države, kot razredni boj.
It goes without saying that Janez or you a Kulak go to the Gulag. Janša was a lifelong member of the Communist Party of Yugoslavia, until they kicked him out for reportedly being too communistic. I should mention that I didn't manage to find a 100% confirmed reason for his expulsion from the party in my research, but what I did find to be confirmed for a fact is that Janša did not doubt in the communist system or its future even at the time of his expulsion from the party. Sometime in the late 1980s, Janša had a sudden and complete change of heart regarding his political views. Out of what seems to now be sheer opportunism, he denounced communism and socialism just around the time when it was becoming clear that Yugoslavia would fall apart. His change of heart would eventually culminate in the so-called YBTZ trial, where he and some other dissidents exposed military secrets of the Yugoslav National Army. He was sentenced to 4 years in prison. This wouldn't be his last prison sentence. Janša joined the first liberal conservative opposition movement in Slovenia, the Demos coalition, in which he presented himself as a Slovene nationalist. When Slovenia seceded from Yugoslavia, Janša was assigned as a commander of the newly formed Slovenian Territorial Defense Force, with which he waged a guerrilla campaign against the Yugoslav armed forces in the 10-day war. When the 10-day war was over and won, the Demos coalition splintered into several political parties, including SDS, the then called Social Democratic Party, which, if you're Slovenian, sounds fiercely ironic in hindsight. But at the time, SDS was led by someone else, a man named Jože Pučnik, who was an actual social democrat and overall a well-respected person in modern Slovenian history. Pučnik was, however, usurped by Janša, at which point SDS was kicked out of the Socialist International and was renamed to the Slovenian Democratic Party, the name it holds to this day. And much like the name suggests, the party very democratically decided to keep Janša in charge for 27 years. The only person that's been in charge of a political party for longer than him is a fellow right-wing pundit Zmagoj Linčić of the Slovenian National Party, who, by the way, is not a very good example to go off. Janša would go on to be Prime Minister of Slovenia 3 times. His first government ruled from 2004 to 2008. As Prime Minister, he was one day approached by a Finnish arms manufacturer, Patria. They said that they would like to do business with Slovenia, but at the time there was no real public support or general need for an expansion of the armed forces. So Patria, being the credible and good company that they are, personally offered Janša money in exchange that the Slovenian government buy some shiny Patria armored vehicles. Now Janša, being the good and responsible politician, of course politely declined this offer. No, he took the money and legged it. Didn't do him much good because he was caught and charged with corruption, but was surprisingly acquitted. He did go on to lose the next parliamentary election though. The second Janša government ruled from 2012 to 2013. What I and many other Slovenes distinctly remember from this period is the absolutely massive anti-government protests. Janša became prime minister after Slovenian liberal parties couldn't form a functioning coalition. Well, I guess it's literally the same situation as right now. Janša was pressured to step down but didn't do it because, my democratically elected government. However, he was promptly forced to step down after the National Anti-Corruption Commission found him guilty of, corruption. He was sentenced to jail this time, but it wasn't so much a jail sentence as it was grounding him in his house for a little while like a naughty teenager. And now we can open the can of worms that is the current Janša government. So let's go back to when I said Šarec stepped down and caused the political crisis. In this political crisis, Janša was expected to form a new government because his party has the most seats in parliament. Janša formally invited every party in the parliament to the coalition. The Christian Democrats immediately accepted the invitation, to literally nobody's surprise. The left, the Social Democrats, and 2 out of 4 liberal parties rejected. The 2 liberal parties that decided to attend are the Party of Pensioners, or as we the homies call them, Desus, and SNC. It wouldn't be considered much of a shock for Desus to attend this meeting because they have a past of cooperating with Janša and his past governments. Despite this, it was still a bit of a shock considering they had only recently changed leadership for the first time. Well, the things that happened in Disus aren't exactly relevant to any of this, so let's instead focus on the elephant in the room, SMC, the center/center-left social liberal party that literally had its foundations in anti-Janshism, and just generally existing to unite the liberals of Slovenia against him. It was completely contradictory for them to support Janša, but nonetheless there was a reason for it. SMC was, and still is, polling less than 1% in electoral polls. Now, even more so than ever, because they literally betrayed one of their most core values of being anti-Janša. Why does this matter? In the Slovenian system, in order to gain seats in the parliament, there is a 4% popular vote threshold. Basically, there was no way for SMC politicians to be re-elected if early elections were called, so to save their asses and salaries, they gave the middle finger to their voters and gave Janša the majority. This is why the current situation is dangerous. No matter how you put it, the public had no say in choosing this new government. This was not the people's will, which is still very evident in public opinion polls to this day. The center-left parties have a clear popular advantage to the right-wing parties, and yet, somehow, SD's pundits insist that Janša has some God-given democratic right to slowly turn us into an Orbanist state. I think this is actually a good point to segue into the next segment, which covers what living under a Janša actually means. Ljudi in podjetja, pospešimo regionalni razvoj. One of the more strange things Janša's governments are distinct for is the immediate replacement and purging of various heads of various state apparatuses. His first order of business when he became the prime minister this year was to immediately change the head of the police force and the army. Normally, when right-wing populist nationalists start changing the heads of various armed wings of the state, it tends to be quite a cause for concern. Aside from changing the heads of the army and police, he also changed the head of the National Institute for Public Health with a literal crackhead who is mostly in the position because he's ideologically aligned with Janša's rhetoric. I will link additional sources for his various staff purges in the description, although, fair warning, most of them are going to be in Slovene. As of the time of me recording this, Janša intends to soon replace the head of the national radio television network, RTV Slovenia. The reason this is terrifying brings us to the next characteristic of his governments. The strained relationship he has with the media couldn't be more apparent. Because most Slovenian media outlets tend to portray him as a criminal, his solution was to ingeniously start his own media outlets. The magazine, ironically named Democracy, and the literal Fox News of Slovenia, Nova 24 TV. All you need to know is that Nova 24 has a daily segment called Who is Lying to You, in which they accuse just about every other media outlet in the country to be illegitimate and fake news. Oh, and they regularly run advertisements for the neo-Nazi Generation Identity movement. If you've never heard of them or don't understand why they're bad news, Kraut made a really good video on them and their murderous past, and I suggest you check it out. Link in the description. Janša, following world trends, has compared female reporters to whiny dogs and naturally accused most media outlets in the country to be leftist propaganda and fake news. And before any of you start even considering that as a possibility, let me specify that the only media outlets he deems legitimate are those who have a very clear bias towards him. No, seriously, the only media outlets he promotes on his Twitter are Demokracija and Nova 24, on which he makes frequent appearances. Believe me, I'd love to talk about these media outlets more because they're absolutely ridiculous, but I'll leave that topic for another day. Another clear sign that Janša is prime minister is the inherent corruption of government officials. I will only cover one, as the kids say, epic fail of this government, because if I tried going through all of them, this video wouldn't end. There's literally a list of 100 mistakes this government has already made, and I'm not going through that. When the coronavirus came to Slovenia, the government placed an order for 3.8 million masks. The defense minister and president of the Christian Democrats, Matej Tonin, stated that the government paid 10 million euros for masks and other protective equipment. Soon after making that statement, the mad lad said that the truck carrying 3.8 million masks that the government had bought just disappeared somewhere in southwest Slovenia. When they asked the Minister of Finances and professional ass-shaking president of the SMC party, Zdravko Počivalšek, on the matter, he presented a slightly different story, in which they, quote, ordered 3 million masks worth 1.68 million euros, but the payment would only be made when the masks arrived in Slovenia. He went on to say that it's true that the masks never arrived and that they immediately ordered a new batch. Do you see where these stories don't overlap very well? The defense minister said that something malicious had taken place and that somebody was profiteering. The masks in question were being ordered from a company in Bosnia, the chairman of which came forward stating that a middleman had sent his company a copy of a €200,000 payment confirmation for the masks, but never the money itself. I'll leave a link to the article in the description, but if there's anything you need to take from this is that the Minister of Defense and the Minister of Finance have conflicting stories on the matter. The Bosnian company released the actual contract it had with the Slovenian government for the payment of €1.68 million for the masks. This means the transaction was made. Some food for thought. The value-added tax for such a transaction is €400,000. A month after this whole thing took place, the Minister of Finance was visited by our homies at the Anti-Corruption Commission and is, as of the time of this being recorded, under investigation of potential embezzlement of public funds. In this last segment, I'll quickly mention a few other odd happenings under the Janša government that don't get much foreign media attention because, even as I was researching everything for this video, it dawned on me that Janša keeps pretty tight control over any media that could potentially be harmful for his image in the foreign eye. If you try googling for any of his embezzlement scandals in English Google, you probably won't find much. Janša recently made a tweet on the anniversary of the Srebrenica massacre where he said the horrors committed there were the result of the so-called Communist Academy of the Yugoslav National Army that Ratko Mladic was a pioneer of. He has faced a lot of scrutiny for this disrespectful tweet, but still refuses to apologize for it. There is a fake Gilets jaunes movement in the Slovenian protest that supports Janša. I have reason to believe these are well-coordinated neo-Nazis that are being hired by SDS to cause chaos in the protests. There is an entire article on them that exposes some of the neo-Nazi members, the link to which will be in the description. And as a side note, they also make frequent appearances on Nova 24. Janša is a master propagandist. There are a good number of sources that make the claim that there is a basement in the SDS party headquarters in which there is about 20 square meters of space for the youth wing of the party, SDM, to operate multiple computers and handheld electronic devices with the goal of spreading as much pro-Janša sentiment on the internet as possible. If you're Slovenian, you might have noticed the almost absurd amount of SDS supporters on Twitter and Facebook, but rarely on YouTube, because YouTube isn't a very often used platform for Slovenian political commentary. Speaking of the SDS youth wing, the president of that wing, the irradiated potato, Jan Mahnic, is a very proud supporter of the aforementioned neo-Nazi Generation Identity movement, even taking a picture of himself in the parliament with a copy of the Generation Identity manifesto and posting it to Twitter. At one point of these protests, Janša ordered the main square on which people were protesting to be closed off by police. No, this wasn't a COVID measure because he soon realized how dumb it is to restrict the citizens' right to protest so blatantly. The square is now once again open as a protest ground. I go to the anti-government protests just about every week, and if you're Slovene, I urge you to do so too. I have but 4 words left to say to everyone still watching this video. Smrt janšizmu, svoboda Sloveniji.